The flag ceremony started at precisely 800 hours. The brass section of the Navy band played the anthem, and the hall smelled faintly of polish and starch. I stood at the edge of the formation, my hand brushing the ribbons on my uniform. Silver Star Recommendation, Joint Service Commendation, Iraq Campaign Medal. The light caught the medal, but no one was looking. Behind me, I heard a laugh that didn't belong in a place of discipline. "Ma'am, your blouse still has the old NWU Type 1 pattern," vintage Tom Branson said quietly to the man next to him. The smirk in his voice cut through the ceremony's order like static through a radio. I didn't turn. Years of service had trained me to hold silence the way others hold a weapon. The power flickered, lights dimmed for half a second, and the PA system crackled with a familiar tone. One main circuit standby for program resume. The voice of a petty officer echoed through the hall. I adjusted the edge of my blouse eyes forward, pretending not to hear the whispers. Tom leaned closer still, too young to recognize consequence. "Didn't they retire that pattern in 2019? Guess someone missed the memo." I could have replied. I could have told him that some uniforms aren't about regulation, they're about memory. Instead, I breathed in through my nose and said nothing. Admiral Reed walked past our row, a folder tucked under his arm. He was the kind of man who carried authority the way others carried weight. Calm, deliberate, no need for volume. The folder slipped from his grasp as he reached for the podium, scattering a few papers. I bent down to help. My eyes caught the top sheet for a split second. OP Nav Form 1650-14 Personal Awards Recommendation. My own name was printed on it. Warren Elise M. Commander, 05. Reed glanced down and frowned slightly. "That's yours," I whispered, handing the file back. But he didn't take it right away. His eyes lingered on a single line, and I saw his expression change from confusion to recognition. "Call sign Iron Dove," he murmured under his breath. He looked up at me, really looked this time, and something in his gaze tightened. I knew that look. It was the look of a man replaying a memory he thought he'd buried. Around us, the hall buzzed with low conversation. The host on stage tried to recover the sequence. "Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated for the commencement of honors." Chairs scraped the floor. Someone coughed. The air felt heavy like before a storm. Reed walked to the microphone, his face unreadable. I stood still, my pulse steady, despite the noise around me. Years of convoy runs in Iraq had taught me to wait through chaos. Somewhere behind me, Tom whispered again, softer now, "Guess the Admiral's got his favorites." He chuckled once more, and the sound grated against the quiet. I could feel every muscle in my jaw tense. They laughed at the fabric, I thought. They never read the frequency. The first time I'd heard my call sign broadcast across a battlefield, it came through a broken headset during a firefight near Fallujah. Iron Dove meant calm transmission under fire. Back then, there was no laughter, only the clicking of encrypted radios and the sound of men waiting for coordinates that could save or end them. Now, 2 decades later, I stood in a hall filled with polished shoes and empty respect, listening to someone mock a uniform that had survived more than he ever would. The ceremony resumed. Reed spoke into the microphone voice level and practiced. "Today we honor those whose service exemplifies the quiet strength of the Navy." His gaze flicked to me briefly, then back to the audience. He shuffled the papers once more, pausing on one that wasn't part of the schedule. The lighting hummed. My reflection glimmered faintly on the plaque beside the stage names engraved in brass years of service, condensed to dates and dashes. I wondered if mine would ever make it there, or if the world would forget like it often did with women who fought their battles silently. As the color guard marched forward and the anthem swelled again, I felt something shift. Not outside, but within. This wasn't just a ceremony, it was an audit of respect, and soon every balance would be settled. Have you ever watched a toxic family mock your discipline, only to see karma broadcast on every channel? Winter came late to Virginia Beach that year. The ocean looked like brushed steel under a gray sky, and the wind had that sharp salt bite that made people hurry indoors. My alarm went off at 600, same as it always had during deployment years. Old habits die harder than most people realize. Coffee black radio on low volume. The scanner clicked once before the familiar voice said, "Comms clear Zulu time 1100. I still replied out of instinct, even though there was no one on the other end. Civilian life had a strange kind of silence. I worked from a converted spare bedroom now, an office for a defense logistics firm, contracted under CivNav. My title was consultant, which really meant I solved problems others had forgotten how to think about. Most days were spreadsheets, procurement codes, and the occasional call from someone trying to make sense of Navy supply chains. I still lined my pens parallel to the keyboard and logged every call in 24-hour format. Precision was the one discipline I never retired from. Around noon, my daughter Melissa called. Her voice carried that forced cheerfulness people use when they're about to ask for something uncomfortable. "Mom, we're having Thanksgiving at Dad's this year. Susan wanted to invite you. It's been a long time." I paused. David, my ex-husband, and Susan, his new wife, lived 20 minutes away, but managed to make it feel like another planet. "Sure," I said. "I'll bring pie." "You don't have to," she replied quickly. "Susan's got everything planned." I smiled at the tone. Susan's idea of planning usually meant assigning everyone a role in her performance of perfection. When Thanksgiving arrived, the house looked like a catalog spread. Candles arranged by height, silver napkin rings polished to mirror shine. The only thing missing was warmth. David met me at the door with that polite stiffness he'd perfected since the divorce. "Glad you came, Elise." Susan worked hard. I can see that I said, "Hanging my coat." Melissa hugged me, her relief visible. "You look nice," she whispered. "So do you. Still eating too fast." She laughed softly. The table was long and perfect, every glass the same height, every plate aligned. Susan smiled with the precision of a parade commander. "I wasn't sure what you prefer, Elise, so I set out something simple." She handed me a plastic fork. "For guests only," she added lightly. David chuckled. Melissa's eyes widened. I turned the fork over in my hand. "Good choice," I said calmly. "It won't bend under pressure." The silence afterward was delicious. David cleared his throat, muttering something about carving the turkey. Susan's smile faltered for the first time that night. I didn't stay long. After dessert, I excused myself with a quiet thank you and stepped into the cold air. My car smelled faintly of salt and engine oil, a combination that always made me feel safe. When I pulled into my driveway, a FedEx envelope waited by the front door. The label bore the Navy Foundation seal. I carried it inside, setting it on the kitchen counter beside the cooling coffee pot. Citation number N2431-7. My heart gave a single heavy thud. I sat at the table for a while, listening to the heater click on and off. Outside, the wind moved through the pines in that low, steady rhythm that reminded me of rotor blades. I traced the seal with my thumb. The last time I had seen one like it was the day I left active duty, when my commanding officer shook my hand and said, "You'll be back before the world forgets what you did." He was wrong. The world forgot quickly. I opened a bottle of water and stared at the envelope for a long time. The television murmured in the background about a local contractor scandal. I thought of David, still chasing prestige, still attending every community gala pretending to be the model veteran husband, beside Susan's glittering social ambition. They both loved the uniform, just not the woman who once wore it. I finally slid a knife under the flap. Inside was a letter, typed in government courier font. It stated that the Navy Foundation had located new documentation concerning my service record. Attached was a scanned copy of a citation dated 2003. My name appeared beside a commendation note, "Recommendation for valor pending final review." My hand tightened around the paper. I had filed that paperwork 20 years ago after Operation Iron Dove, but it had disappeared somewhere in the chain of command. I remembered standing in a sandstorm outside Fallujah, writing those lines by flashlight, while the radio cracked with distant static. Now the words had resurfaced, stamped with the same bureaucratic precision that had buried them. I folded the paper carefully and placed it back in the envelope. The night felt suddenly very still. Somewhere deep in the house, the old clock struck 9. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. The uniform had changed, the world had changed, but the code hadn't. Honor, courage, commitment. I whispered them quietly the way some people whisper prayers. Then I turned off the lights and left the envelope on the table unopened again, waiting for a morning I wasn't sure would ever come. March 2003. The heat in the Fallujah corridor felt like a physical weight pressing against every piece of metal. I was 24, a lieutenant serving as acting convoy operations officer for Task Force 7 Bravo. The dust clung to skin, to uniforms, to the breath itself. The morning started quiet, just the hum of engines and the distant call of radio static. Then came the first burst of gunfire, sharp and close, echoing off the concrete walls of the highway cut. I remember the radio squawk, the voice of Sergeant Mills breaking through the interference. Alpha 1 to Bird Nest troops in contact on Route Bravo 9. Request immediate reroute. My hand tightened around the receiver. I could hear the strain in his tone, the sound of metal pinging in the background. Copy that, Alpha 1, I said. Hold your position, smokescreen, east side. Bravo team pivot grid quad Foxtrot 6. My driver, Petty Officer Darrow, glanced at me. That route's narrow. So is a coffin, I answered, scanning the map on the Garmin 12XL. The line between courage and recklessness always looked thinner on a glowing green screen. We had 3 supply trucks, 2 Humvees, and a medical unit pinned behind a disabled vehicle. The insurgent fire came from the rooftops, short bursts like a metronome of chaos. I ordered suppression fire and dismounted with a team of 4. The radio crackled again, this time higher command. 7 Bravo. Actual to convoy ops. Confirm diversion. Confirmed, I said. Executing now. The call ended with a hiss. No backup, just a confirmation that they knew we were on our own. The convoy began to move slow but steady through the alternate path. I directed traffic, manually shouting over the roar of diesel and the percussion of shots. A round struck the ground near my boot, spraying sand. I didn't flinch. My mind narrowed to math distances, angles, timing. 23 minutes later, every vehicle cleared the kill zone. 18 wounded, no fatalities. The last Humvee rolled in the driver, bleeding from a graze on his arm, but grinning like a man who'd cheated death. "You're a damn machine, ma'am," he said. I smiled back. Machines break. People adapt. When we returned to the forward operating base, the air felt heavier, thicker, with the aftermath of adrenaline. Lieutenant Colonel Jensen was waiting near the command tent. His uniform was spotless boots, too clean for where we'd been. "Good work out there, Warren," he said. "I'll handle the report." He didn't mean handle. He meant own. I watched him sign his name on the operations summary later that evening. He listed himself as Convoy Commander, credited coordination and field leadership to his own initiative. I stood there silently, file in hand, until Sergeant Mills whispered, "Not worth it, ma'am. They never remember the ones who actually drive." Maybe he was right. The report went upward, wrapped in the language of success, sealed under DoD Directive 1348. 33 classified before anyone outside the chain could read it. For years afterward, Operation Iron Dove existed only as a rumor, an unnamed success in the endless list of convoys that made it home. I went on to other assignments, other missions carrying the unspoken knowledge that truth travels slower than paperwork. The memory of that day faded only in color, never in weight. Sometimes I would wake to the echo of the radio code in my dreams. Alpha 1 to Bird Nest, Route Bravo 9. Always the same, always unresolved. 2 decades later in 2023, the truth came back to me in the most ordinary way imaginable. I was at a local yard sale in Virginia Beach, browsing through old books and tools with a retired Marine neighbor. Among a pile of leather notebooks and picture frames, I found one labeled simply Jensen. The name pulled a memory like a thread through time. I opened it carefully. Inside were pages of neat handwriting, military dates, call signs, and clipped reports. And then I saw it my name. Lieutenant Elise Warren executed perfect fire discipline and rapid tactical assessment under sustained enemy fire. Recommend Silver Star, pending confirmation. My heart froze for a moment. The handwriting was Jensen's. The ink had bled slightly through the paper, but the words were clear. He had known exactly what he took credit for. He had written my commendation in private while signing his name to the official record. The hypocrisy should have made me angry, but it didn't. Instead, it made me still. I ran my hand over the page, feeling the texture of the paper brittle and rough from years of heat and neglect. There was something poetic about finding proof of valor in a widow's yard sale bought for $3 beside a box of broken Christmas ornaments. I closed the journal and stood there in the soft light of late afternoon. The ocean wind carried faint salt through the neighborhood. I thought of that convoy again, of the sound of engines and the weight of silence after the last shot. For years I had told myself that recognition didn't matter, that doing the job was enough. But maybe it was never about medals or headlines. Maybe it was about truth finally surfacing no matter how long it stayed buried. I paid for the notebook, thanked the widow, and walked back to my car. The folded map of Iraq still sat in the glove box, edges worn and yellowed. I slid the journal beside it, two ghosts resting in the same compartment. The world might forget names, but paper never does. That night, I opened the first page again and whispered the words out loud as if reading an oath. Commander Warren executed perfect fire discipline. The air in the room felt lighter afterward, as though the desert had finally let go. The sun over Norfolk had that faded gold look that only appeared in early autumn. I arrived at Ocean View Grill for David's birthday dinner more out of obligation than sentiment. The restaurant was crowded, the kind of place that made middle managers feel important. I could smell the butter from the crab cakes before I even reached the table. David stood first, pulling at his tie with exaggerated courtesy. "Elise, you made it," Susan insisted. His voice held the same smug undertone it always had when he wanted to appear gracious. Susan waved from across the table, her smile practiced to perfection. Melissa sat between them, visibly tense, her fork tracing circles on a napkin. "Traffic was light," I said, taking a seat. "How's business, David?" He shrugged with false modesty. "Summit Group is keeping me busy. You know how it is, someone's got to manage all the big projects." I nodded once. I did know how it was. I used to manage convoys through active fire. The waiter poured water into our glasses, and Susan leaned forward. "David tells me you're still doing that consulting thing. It must be so quiet compared to the Navy." "Quiet is good," I said. "Means no one's shooting at you for being in charge." The table fell silent for a second, before Susan laughed lightly, unsure whether I was joking. She shifted topics fast. "Well, it's David's night. He's been teasing us all day about being another year wiser. One of his colleagues, a man in a suit too shiny for daylight, raised his glass. To David, the only guy I know who can make even the Navy take orders." The others chuckled. Melissa winced. I sipped my water slowly. "In the Navy," I said evenly, "we don't order men. We deploy them." The laughter stopped mid-breath. David's face twitched somewhere between irritation and embarrassment. Susan set her napkin down, smiling too hard. "That's very military of you." "It's very accurate," I replied. The waiter returned just in time to break the tension, asking about desserts. I declined. The conversation shifted to real estate and car leases. I sat quietly, half listening, half detached, counting the seconds until I could leave without appearing rude. I caught Melissa's eyes once, and she gave me the faintest nod, part apology, part gratitude. After dinner, David insisted on paying. When the check came, he waved his card with his usual showmanship. "Corporate expense," he said, "perk of management." I watched him sign, leave no tip, and walk out as if the world owed him applause. The others followed. Melissa lingered long enough to hug me at the door. "You handled that better than I could," she whispered. "That's because I learned long ago not to waste ammo on noise," I said. The next morning, over my usual coffee, I remembered something. David had mentioned Summit Group's corporate account with Ocean View Grill years ago. Old habits die hard, especially when they involve unpaid bills. I opened my laptop, found the restaurant's contact page, and typed a short message to the manager. Good evening. This is regarding an unpaid corporate tab for Summit Group Holdings. Amount outstanding appears to be $1,237. I thought you might appreciate a reminder before closing your monthly books. I signed it with my full name and title, Defense Logistics Consultant. No threats, no accusations, just accuracy. The following day, while browsing the local paper online, I found a small notice under Business Briefs. Outstanding balances Summit Group Holdings. $1,237 reported by Ocean View Grill. The irony tasted better than dessert. Around noon, David called. His voice carried forced calm. You didn't happen to send an email to Ocean View, did you? I send a lot of emails, I said. Why? Because my office got a call about a balance I don't owe. Then it should be easy to prove I answered. Paperwork usually tells the truth. There was a pause long enough for both of us to hear what wasn't being said. You always have to win, don't you? He muttered finally. No, I said. I just don't like unpaid debts. When I hung up, the silence in the room felt cleaner somehow. Melissa texted later that afternoon. Dad's in a mood. Did you do something? Nothing worth mentioning, I replied. He'll calm down once he realizes karma has good accounting. That night, I stood by the window with the envelope from the Navy Foundation still on the table. The city lights flickered like distant signals on an open frequency. Somewhere out there, people believed power came from volume. They had no idea how effective silence could be when used with precision. The next morning began with the faint smell of starch and coffee. Sunlight came through the blinds in perfect lines across the kitchen counter, where my old service uniform hung from a hanger. The khaki fabric still carried the ghost of deployment sand in its seams, even after years of careful storage. Harris arrived at exactly 0800. He was punctual as always, a retired Marine gunnery sergeant, with a voice like gravel and a memory sharper than most knives. Morning, ma'am, he said, stepping inside without ceremony. He eyed the uniform and grinned. You still do your gig line by memory? I handed him the iron. Muscle memory and PTSD are cousins, I said, and he barked a laugh. You always did have a way of putting truth into formation. The hiss of steam filled the kitchen as he pressed the creases flat, running the iron like a ritual. I sat at the table, polishing the brass buttons one by one. There was a rhythm to it, the same steady precision that once calmed my pulse in combat zones. Harris looked up briefly. What's the occasion? You going to some ceremony? Something like that, I said. I didn't tell him about the Navy Foundation envelope or the citation rediscovered after 20 years. Some ghosts prefer quiet company. I laid out the ribbons, next aligning them with care on the small wooden board. Navy Commendation, Good Conduct, Expeditionary, NATO ISAF. My hands moved automatically, muscle memory guiding the placement. I checked the NATO ribbon again, ensuring it sat exactly 1/8 of an inch above the pocket line. Harris leaned over my shoulder. Still perfect, he said. You know, I've seen colonels mess that up. That's because colonels delegate, I replied. Sergeants check twice. He chuckled, shaking his head. Ain't that the truth? The cat jumped onto the countertail, flicking like it had tactical intent. It padded straight toward the beret resting beside the ribbon board and promptly sat on it. I sighed. Unauthorized personnel on deck, I muttered. Harris nearly dropped the iron laughing. That cat's got rank, he said. Acting Chief of Household Security, I said. Self-appointed. The cat blinked slowly, unimpressed by the reprimand. Harris set the iron aside and leaned on the counter. You know, ma'am, most people hang this stuff up and never touch it again. Why now? I paused, watching the sunlight glint off the edge of a brass insignia. Because there's a difference between moving on and being erased, I said. He nodded slowly, his expression softening. Roger that. I pinned the final ribbon and adjusted the collar. The uniform looked alive again, a mirror of the person I used to be, disciplined, steady, untouchable. I slipped it onto the mannequin stand near the wall. For a moment, the room felt like a barracks inspection. The silence had that same taut energy before someone calls attention. You ever miss it? Harris asked quietly. Every day, I said. but not the way people think. I miss the clarity. Out there you knew who had your six. Here everyone smiles while counting the knives behind your back. He didn't argue. Marines rarely do when the truth is obvious. He poured himself a cup of coffee, the sound of the spoon stirring against the mug oddly comforting. "You still do radio codes in your head?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "Only when I'm angry." "So all the time, then?" "Lately?" "Yes." We both laughed, the kind that comes from years of surviving the same system. I picked up the envelope again, reading the embossed seal for the 100th time. The letter inside confirmed what Jensen's journal already hinted at: the commendation had been approved posthumously. For several soldiers, my name included, though the award itself had been misplaced during reclassification. The phrase "pending correction" carried the weight of 2 decades of bureaucratic indifference. "You gonna fight it?" Harris asked. "No," I said. "I'm going to correct it. Difference being one gets attention, the other gets results." He smiled at that pride flickering in his eyes. "Damn, ma'am, you still talk like command staff." "Old reflex," I said. "Never learned to soften orders." We spent the next hour in easy silence, cleaning each insignia, folding the trousers with perfect symmetry. The faint scent of starch and brass polish filled the air, mingling with the smell of coffee. It reminded me of early mornings aboard the ship before deployment routine, before chaos. When Harris left, he saluted at the door, half serious, half nostalgic. I returned it without thinking. "You'll wear it again," he said quietly. "Not for them, but for yourself." After he drove off, I stood alone in the kitchen. The uniform glowed faintly under the afternoon light, every ribbon aligned, every crease precise. I reached out and straightened the collar once more. The weight of fabric and history felt the same, measured, deliberate, necessary. The cat brushed against my leg and looked up as if to ask what came next. "Stand by," I told it softly. "Orders pending." It purred, circling twice before settling beside the mannequin. I poured another cup of coffee and sat down at the table, the envelope open in front of me. The past had finally reported back for duty, and I intended to give it new orders. April 2024. The air at Naval Station Norfolk smelled of salt metal and jet fuel, the unmistakable scent of service and history. I parked outside Gate 2B just as the base loudspeakers crackled to life for morning colors. The guard at the checkpoint looked barely old enough to rent a car. He straightened when he saw my credentials. "Retiree ID, ma'am," I handed it over. "Commander Warren 05, serial 987612031. He blinked, startled by the formality, then quickly returned the salute. "Yes, ma'am. Proceed to parking Zulu 2. His voice trembled slightly, as if unsure whether to be deferential or casual. The power of old ranks is that they never quite fade, they just wait to be acknowledged. I drove through the gates slowly, the road stretching past hangars and barracks, memories flickering in my peripheral vision like ghosts in formation. Every corner of the base carried echoes of orders, once shouted mistakes, once learned victories, once uncelebrated. The morning sun glinted off the water beyond the pier, reflecting against the hulls of moored ships. The sight was both familiar and foreign, a place frozen in loyalty. I parked near the administrative annex and stepped out. The uniform fit as if time had paused for it. My ribbons caught the light with quiet dignity, the brass insignia glimmering faintly in the breeze. I could feel eyes turning my way, not recognition, just curiosity. The military has a way of cataloging everything, even the unknown. Near the main walkway, I spotted a familiar posture, Tom Branson. He stood by a white pickup clipboard in hand, his contractor badge hanging from a lanyard that looked too official for his competence. The bold print read, "NavFac Procurement Lot 7. His voice carried across the lot as he barked at 2 junior contractors about schedule deviations and supply chain delays. The arrogance hadn't aged well. I almost walked past him until he turned and froze mid-sentence. His eyes darted from my uniform to my face, confusion flickering behind a forced smile. "Commander Warren," he said, as if testing whether the title still belonged to me. "Didn't expect to see you here." "You're back consulting again, just visiting," I said. "Old habits die hard." "Ah," he said, tapping his clipboard. "Well, we're swamped this week. Big bid under review. Lot 7 procurement. High stakes." I nodded once the way I used to when subordinates made excuses they thought sounded professional. "I read about that," I said. "Interesting vendor alignment issues." His shoulders stiffened. "Issues conflict of interest declarations," I replied lightly. "You did file your Form DD 2572 correctly, didn't you?" His eyes twitched before he could control it. "Of course. All clean." "Good," I said. Because the review board doesn't take kindly to omissions. I didn't need to say more. 2 months earlier, I had logged his conflict of interest flag after a procurement officer quietly mentioned irregularities. It wasn't revenge, then just maintenance of order. But standing there watching him squirm, it felt like justice aligning itself on schedule. He tried to regain composure. "You know how these things are. Paperwork gets messy. Only for people who treat it like paper," I said. "For the rest of us, it's a record." The silence between us stretched long enough for the wind to shift, carrying the sound of a nearby drill instructor shouting cadence. Left, right, left. The rhythm echoed off the concrete like a heartbeat. Tom cleared his throat. "Well, nice seeing you, Commander. I should get your documents in order," I said. "Yes, you should." He turned quickly, calling to his team with exaggerated authority voice cracking slightly under pressure. I walked toward the admin building, each step measured deliberate. Inside the reception area smelled faintly of disinfectant and printer toner. A young petty officer looked up from behind the counter. "Morning, ma'am." "Can I help you, Commander Warren?" I said, sliding my ID across. "I'm here for the Veterans Recognition Event briefing." He typed rapidly, nodded. "You're on the list. Room 214, Admiral Reed's section." "Thank you," I said. As I walked down the hallway, the walls lined with framed citations and unit photographs, I caught my reflection in the glass. Time had added lines, not cracks. I looked exactly like what I had always been, a survivor of systems both mechanical and human. The meeting was routine administrative. Reed wasn't there yet, but his staff briefed us on the event protocol, seating, and press coverage. Nothing extraordinary, just the machinery of ceremony grinding into motion. But beneath the surface, I could feel something gathering momentum, like a current under calm water. When I stepped back outside an hour later, Tom was gone. His truck remained parked crookedly, a half-empty coffee cup on the hood. Across the lot, a senior official in a dark suit was speaking to 2 naval auditors. They carried clipboards stamped with the Navy Procurement Office seal. Timing, it seemed, had perfect aim. I passed by without looking back. In the distance, the base loudspeaker came alive again. "Attention, all personnel, stand by for inspection readiness call." The phrase carried its own poetry. Every system eventually inspects itself. I reached my car, glanced once more toward the pier where the ships glimmered against the horizon. There was something deeply satisfying about returning to a place that once defined you, only to realize you now defined it instead. Before driving off, I looked at the old laminated base map tucked in my visor. Under the section labeled Bravo Zone Logistics, someone had written in pencil years ago, "Keep your eyes open, your silence sharper." I smiled faintly. The order still stood. The house lights dipped and the PA cracked like a match to dry tinder, before smoothing into a steady tone that filled the hall. Attention on deck came the command clean and clipped, and every conversation stopped as the color guard pivoted toward the flag. The anthem rose from the brass in bright waves that felt both ceremonial and intimate, a tune I had heard on wind-swept decks and in desert tents where radios buzzed with sand. I stood with the room eyes fixed on the flag, the silk moving only a breath in the conditioned air. When we sat, I studied the card tucked at the edge of my seat. Guest Row E. It was a small insult, but precise, the kind of administrative misstep that speaks loudly without a single word. The reserved section near the aisle was ringed with media, and senior officers, name placards, set in neat lines like ranks on inspection. Mine did not appear among them. It would have been easy to care, but I had spent too many years caring about the wrong things. A hostess in a navy blazer asked two men to slide down and then glanced at me with the polite smile of someone trained to move people rather than see them. "Please remain seated until your section is called," she said. I nodded, letting the words pass like a breeze across a still harbor. On stage, the host reviewed the roster, his voice amplified just enough to flatten its warmth. "Distinguished guests and families, we are honored to recognize service that reflects the highest traditions of the Navy." He began to read names, each followed by titles and dates that sounded like coordinates on a chart. Applause rose and fell in even rhythms. Cameras flashed at all the usual places. In the row behind me, a woman whispered a story about a cousin who had deployed twice. I kept my eyes on the podium. 2 rows ahead, Tom Branson leaned toward a colleague and smirked. "Guess they forgot their own soldiers," he murmured, just loud enough for the joke to travel. He did not know the difference between a soldier and a sailor, or he did not care. Either way, the word landed with the graceless thud of someone who had never learned the weight of language. I took a slow breath and found the steady count I used on night watches. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Calm is a skill. The host continued through the program until he reached a page that made him pause. He frowned at the paper, blinked, then resumed with a different name than the one printed on the screens. A ripple of confusion moved through the front rows. Someone adjusted the teleprompter. Someone else bent to whisper at the stage manager. The anthem music had faded, but I could still feel it in my ribs, that disciplined rise and deliberate fall, a trained heartbeat. Near the foot of the stage, Admiral Marcus Reed sat slightly apart, a posture of ownership without ego. His gray hair caught the lights, and his hands rested on a leather folder that looked heavy enough to anchor a story. I watched him open the folder and finger through a set of documents, then stop. He leaned closer, as if a line had pulled him from the surface into depth. He lifted the paper so the stage lights reached it more directly. On the far wall, a projector slid to a slideshow of ships and crews and ceremonies, past images that meant well and mostly failed to reach the living details they were meant to honor. The host misread another name. My own name formed silently on his lips, and then slipped away like something he had not rehearsed. The rhythm of applause faltered. Tom bent forward again, voice soft with petty delight. Maybe the printer ran out of ink. I let the comment float and vanish. A petty officer in dress whites conferred with an aide near the curtains. The aide pointed at the roster, then at Admiral Reed, and the petty officer moved toward him with the cautious urgency of a man trying not to disturb a tide. Reed glanced up, accepted the roster, and compared it with the contents of his folder. The PA hissed once as if impatient. Somewhere near the rear doors, a baby gave a small cry that was quickly soothed. Reed turned a page back then, forward, and then stilled completely. He took off his reading glasses, cleaned them with a cloth he drew from his sleeve, and set them back on his face with a precision that signaled decision. He lifted his right hand, and the aide stepped closer to offer the small black remote that controlled the house microphone priority. Reed did not take it. Instead, he rose and walked to the podium with the quiet assurance of a man who had spent a life turning noise into orders, and orders into outcomes. The host saw him approach and stepped back at once. Reed set his folder on the lectern and adjusted the microphone. For a heartbeat, the room seemed to lean toward him. He looked at the host and then at the front rows where senior officers sat with their perfect posture and their long careers pinned to their chests. Then he looked farther back. His eyes found mine and held not long, but long enough for history to move like a current between 2 points that had not touched in years. The roster in front of him carried a small annotation in the margin. I could see it from row E because he tilted the paper to read it again. Reclassified Oro 3/2024 per DoD Order N 1348. A technical note in a sea of ceremony. A door unlatched in a hallway no one had walked for 2 decades. Reed cleared his throat. The microphone caught that small human sound and made it official. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said in that even voice that filled a deck without ever straining, "stand by. We missed a name of record." The words hung in the air with the exact weight of a turning point. People glanced at programs as if paper could catch up with truth. The stage manager froze. The petty officer squared his shoulders like a man bracing to hold a line. Tom stopped smirking. The room changed temperature. Reed flipped to the top sheet in his folder. I recognized the format before I recognized the letters. The spacing that belonged to citations, the lines drawn to hold facts in place. He read quietly for himself first, as if confirming that what he had in hand deserved the full measure of daylight. Then he lifted his gaze and looked past the stage lights into the rows where the forgotten sat, and the remembered waited their turn. For the duration of a breath, I felt the clean edge of anticipation cut away everything extraneous. The misprinted placard, the misplaced seat, the joke about a soldier in a sailor's house, all of it fell off the table of my attention. The hall was very still. I could hear the faint electric hum that lives inside a sound system when it is poised between silence and speech. The instructor cadence outside had gone quiet. Somewhere a phone charged in a purse. Somewhere a child shifted on a parent's lap. Reed set a finger lightly on the page and spoke in the tone that had launched ships and paused storms. "Our program will continue, but not before we correct the record." He did not look at the teleprompter. He did not wait for permission. He began to read what the margin note had finally allowed to surface. The first line was the formal preface that belongs to acts of witness, for service reflecting conspicuous courage and exceptional judgment in active operations. He stopped there just long enough for the shape of the words to register. Then he changed cadence, not louder, but truer. "There is a name here that should have been called before any of us took our seats." In the row behind me, someone whispered an apology to no one. In front of me, a wife reached for a husband's hand. Reed drew a breath and looked back down at the citation again. He ran a thumb along the edge of the paper, then tapped the microphone lightly, not to test it, but to summon every ear in the room. "Stand by," he said once more, and even the lights seemed to hold still. The microphone held a thin breath of electric hum as Admiral Reed set his finger on the page and began to read in a voice that sounded like steel wrapped in cloth. "For conspicuous gallantry while serving as Convoy Operations Officer, Task Force 7 Bravo, Operation Iron Dove." He let the words settle, then continued with the precise language that belongs to events recorded under oath. On or about March 2003, along the Fallujah corridor under sustained small arms fire and mortar bursts, Lieutenant Elise M. Warren, then acting Convoy Operations Officer, executed rapid tactical assessment and directed a reroute through grid, Quad Foxtrot 6, utilizing a Garmin 12 XL receiver to confirm coordinates, while maintaining command and control over mixed elements. She coordinated suppression and smoke east side while establishing a staggered interval for 3 supply trucks, 2 Humvees, and 1 medical unit pinned behind a disabled vehicle on Route Bravo 9. Time on target 23 minutes. Result 18 wounded, extracted no fatalities. I felt the muscle memory of the net in my hand, the weight of a handset slick with dust and sweat, and the way the world narrows to numbers when lives depend on arithmetic. Radio traffic recorded as follows: Alpha 1 to Bird Nest troops in contact on Route Bravo 9. Bird Nest copies hold position smoke east, pivot to grid F6. He paused again, letting the sequence hang there like a bridge between what happened and what had been hidden. Melissa gasped somewhere to my left, a sharp intake of air that carried years of questions in a single sound. In the row ahead, Tom Branson shifted his weight, and his glass struck the floor with a dull tap, then rolled once and rested at his shoe. Reed returned to the page. Lieutenant Warren left relative cover to manually direct vehicle spacing, while rounds impacted within meters of her position. She retained calm discipline under fire and maintained communications despite interference and partial jamming. Her orders allowed medical evacuation of multiple personnel, including 2 litter patients who would not have survived delay. He lifted his eyes and scanned the senior rows, and then the back rows, and then the places where the forgotten sit when programs get printed wrong. The citation continued with the neutral cruelty of facts. Distance from point of ambush to extraction turn point 400 meters. Total vehicles 6. Call signs Alpha 1, Alpha 2, Bravo, 3 Bravo, 4 Medevac 1 and Admin 2. Estimated enemy shooters 5 to 7 rooftop positions with 1 probable spotter. Friendly casualties 0, KIA, 18 WIA, all extracted. The room had become a study in stillness. Reed shifted posture, and the lights caught a faint line of silver at his temple. Somewhere in this hall, he said, my unit waited for coordinates that never came through our net because our comms were jammed. We received a single burst, a correction cut to under 10 seconds that moved us out of a kill box and into an exit lane. I never knew who sent that data. His gaze settled on me without ceremony or theatrics. She sent it, he said. She sent it while directing 6 vehicles under fire. He did not embellish, and he did not raise his voice. He let the sentence do the work. The host stood to the side holding his script as if it had turned into someone else's story. Reed returned to the sheet and read the closing language that had slept for 2 decades in a file someone finally opened. In recognition of conspicuous gallantry and exceptional judgment under fire, resulting in the saving of multiple lives, Lieutenant Warren is hereby cited for actions above and beyond the demands of duty and recommended for award under the provisions of Department of Defense Directive 1348.33. He simply looked at me as if we were on a net again and said, "Commander Warren, please stand." My knees unlocked almost by themselves. I rose from guest row E, the row of leftovers and afterthoughts, and found the floor steady beneath my shoes. The air smelled like polish and paper and the faint bite of ozone from hot lights. Tom's chair scraped. I did not look at him. Melissa's hand covered her mouth. I did not look at her either because I knew if I did, I would have to manage her tears. And today I was managing only gravity. Reed spoke to the room, but the room felt smaller now, like a wardroom where only truth was allowed. Some citations come late, he said. Some service hides in the noise, but the record does not forget. He lifted his hand, not in salute, not in command, simply in witness. Applause began at the edges, first in the rows where spouses sit and children kick their feet, and then it moved forward in a clean wave that felt like a tide coming home. Photographers hurried down the aisles trying to find angles that made sense of a story that had almost been left out of its own ceremony. I brought my hand to my brow and gave a crisp salute. I held it until Reed returned it with the slight economy of motion that belongs to men who have saluted too many names. When I lowered my hand, the room did not quiet right away. Applause sometimes needs to finish its own thought. Reed took the microphone again. For the record, he said she did not ask for this reading. She did not raise a hand to correct a program. She walked in and took the seat assigned and waited. That patience is not passivity and silence is not surrender. Tom bent to retrieve his fallen glass and set it on the chair beside him without meeting anyone's eye. The host finally found his voice. On behalf of this assembly, we thank you, Commander Warren. The words were fine and harmless and unnecessary. The work was already done. He handed it to me, and for a second, his fingers trembled as if he could feel the charge running through paper. The date sat in the corner like a stubborn survivor. 20 years late can still be on time when the truth arrives intact. I closed the folder, and the sound it made was as soft as a door that had finally found its frame. Reed nodded once, then addressed the audience. We will proceed with our program after a brief correction to our order of events. I could see their reflection on the polished floor like another set of stars. The story did not belong to cameras first. It belonged to the men who had survived a road because someone found a new route in less than half a minute, and to the families who never received 2 folded flags instead of 1. It belonged to the girl beside me who had spent years thinking her mother's work had been an absence rather than a presence. I sat again and felt the chair accept my weight, as if even furniture understood when a room changes purpose. The program would continue, but the hall was different now. The flag looked less like fabric and more like a promise. The words on my citation did not change what I had done, and they did not change who I was. They only changed the volume at which the truth was allowed to speak. Today. The morning after the ceremony, the sky over Norfolk was washed clean by rain, the kind that leaves the air smelling of iron and salt. I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating against the nightstand. The first thing I saw was the headline on the screen: Navy Times Iron Dove identified after 21 years. The photograph below it showed me standing at attention beside Admiral Reed, the light catching the edges of my medals. My name sat beneath the image in font too large to ignore: Commander Elise Warren, quietest hero in uniform. For a long moment, I just stared at it. The years of silence compressed into a headline felt both absurd and exact. Melissa appeared in the doorway holding her coffee mug with both hands. "You made the front page," she said, smiling. I didn't answer right away. Part of me still waited for the correction email, the retraction, the inevitable bureaucratic fix that comes whenever truth finally leaks through the seams. But none came. Instead, my phone lit up again with a number I hadn't seen in months. David. I almost let it go to voicemail, but old habits die slower than pride. I swiped and answered. "Morning, David." He exhaled like someone rehearsing sincerity. "I just saw the article. Incredible, really. We should do an interview together. People love a redemption story, you know." I let the words hang. "We already had our debrief," I said. "It ended in divorce." The silence that followed had a shape. He cleared his throat. "I didn't mean anything by it. I just think it would help your foundation if we showed unity." "The same unity you showed when you signed the house over to yourself," I said. The click on the line was soft but final. I set the phone down and opened my laptop. The article had already spread across feeds, local news anchors reading excerpts like they were decoding something fragile. Comments flooded in veterans from old units piecing memories together. A few remembered the call sign Iron Dove. Others remembered the convoy, but not the name. It was strange seeing strangers confirm your existence like witnesses at a delayed trial. I checked my email and found a new message from the Navy Public Affairs Office confirming the official citations publication under DoD Directive 1348.33. A line near the bottom read, "Commander Warren authorized to attend upcoming press briefing if desired." Desired was generous. What I desired was order. The next email waiting beneath it came from David again, this time forwarded by mistake. Subject line, charity expenses, Q1. Attached was a spreadsheet I recognized from his company, Summit Group Veterans Relief Fund. I had helped him file that paperwork years ago, before realizing his definition of relief included luxury retreats and dinners billed under morale support. I opened the file quietly, scrolling through the familiar lies. I didn't feel anger this time, only precision. Revenge wasn't the word. Correction fit better. I downloaded the attachment and composed a brief message to the IRS Veterans Fraud Unit. "Dear Sir or Ma'am, attached is documentation that may assist in the ongoing investigation regarding misuse of charitable funds by Summit Group Holdings Veterans Relief Division. Respectfully, Commander Elise M. Warren, retired." I sent it without flourish, then closed the laptop. Melissa sat on the couch reading the paper aloud. "Mom, listen to this." She cleared her throat and exaggerated the news anchor tone. "Commander Warren, known during Operation Iron Dove for her calm leadership and refusal to self-promote, exemplifies quiet strength under pressure." The article continues, the Navy confirmed the long anonymous report, credited to call sign Iron Dove, originated from her position during the Fallujah corridor operation, saving 18 wounded service members. She looked up, eyes bright. "They called you the quietest hero in uniform." I smiled just enough for her to see it. "Quiet is easier to carry," I said. She sat beside me. "Did you really save 18 people?" I nodded once. "Teamwork saved them. I just read the map right." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "You know he's going to be mad right." David. He'll be busy explaining invoices, I said. We watched the local news replay the ceremony. The camera caught the exact moment Admiral Reed paused before reading the file, the small shift of his hand before truth became sound. It didn't feel like revenge watching it again. It felt like something restored, like a balance that had been waiting under the surface all along. By afternoon, my inbox filled with messages from former colleagues. Some were congratulations, some were apologies wrapped in nostalgia. One came from Reed himself, short and formal. You carried more than command, you carried integrity. The rest of us finally caught up. M. Reed, Admiral, USN Ret. I printed that one and pinned it above my desk. The day stretched quiet and even. I made dinner simple pasta and wine from a bottle that had survived 3 moves. The cat jumped onto the table and tried to drink from my glass. Unauthorized personnel again, I said. Melissa laughed from the kitchen. You know, Mom, most people would take the day off after all this. Most people didn't spend 20 years off duty waiting for paperwork, I said. She smiled and rolled her eyes. The evening news recycled the story once more with a panel of analysts debating why recognition comes late and why women veterans go unseen. They spoke as if I weren't sitting a few feet away eating dinner. I muted the television and let the silence return. Outside the window, the streetlights flickered on one by one, steady as stars on parade. I thought about Harris, the Marine who had helped press my uniform the day before. He would probably see the article and call to gloat about how he told me so. The uniform hung again by the door, perfectly aligned gig line, crisp as memory. I didn't plan to wear it soon, but I liked knowing it was ready. At midnight, I received one last message from an unknown number. It contained a single line. The system remembers now. No signature, but I knew the style. Read again, probably. I closed my eyes and let the day dissolve. Tomorrow there would be meetings and interviews, requests I would ignore, and maybe an audit or two. Tonight there was quiet. Justice had already been served in the simplest way possible, by being recorded accurately. The following week, the office was quiet enough to hear the hum of the overhead lights. I had just finished signing a stack of grant approvals for the Veterans Technical Reintegration Program when the receptionist buzzed. Commander Warren, there's a Mr. Branson here to see you. I paused, letting the name roll through memory like static before recognition. Tom Branson. I almost smiled. Send him in, I said. A moment later, he appeared in the doorway wearing a civilian suit that looked one size too expensive for his confidence. The tie was neat, but the posture behind it sagged. He carried himself like a man trying to remember what authority felt like. He didn't salute this time. Ma'am, he said, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. I lost my clearance. He lingered at the threshold as though expecting sympathy to pull him the rest of the way in. I gestured toward the chair across from my desk. Clearance or conscience, I asked. He sat without answering. Both, maybe, he said after a moment. I could tell by the way he avoided my eyes that the review had gone exactly as predicted. Procurement fraud leaves a stain no detergent can touch. I folded my hands on the desk. What are you asking for, Tom? He cleared his throat. A recommendation, something to say it was an oversight that I served well before all this. Just a line to help me get back in, a second chance. I studied him for a long time. Behind him, the window caught a reflection of the Veterans Honor Wall across the courtyard, a line of bronze plaques glinting under the noon sun. I rose and walked to the side table, where the coffee pot sat half full. Would you like something to drink? I asked. He nodded too quickly. Yes, ma'am. I poured 2 cups and slid one toward him. The mug was white with navy lettering from a charity event years ago. Across its front, in faded print, it read, Respect Decaf. He looked at it and tried to smile. Clever, he said. Not really, I replied. Just accurate. He hesitated before touching the cup. You didn't lose clearance, Tom. You lost credibility. He winced like I had used a physical weapon. I sat again and leaned back. People think rank protects them, I said, but the real armor is integrity. Once it cracks, you're exposed to everything. He shifted, desperate for dignity. I made a mistake. Everyone does. You covered up a conflict of interest, I said evenly. You redirected veteran support funds to your own firm. That isn't a mistake. That's a calculation. He rubbed his temples. I have a family, a mortgage. So did the men you shortchanged. He looked up, then eyes raw, a flicker of the same arrogance that had once made him sneer at my uniform. You're enjoying this, aren't you? He said quietly, seeing me down here asking. I met his gaze without a blink. I don't enjoy failure, but I respect consequences. He stood abruptly, the chair legs scraping against the tile. You could end this, he said. One call, one letter, and I could get reinstated. You know people now. The irony of that statement almost made me laugh. I do know people, I said, and that's exactly why I won't. His shoulders dropped. He looked smaller somehow, as though the air itself refused to hold him up. He nodded, once muttered something I didn't catch, and turned for the door. At the threshold, he stopped. For what it's worth, he said, I did admire you. I just never thought you'd outlast the rest of us. Neither did they, I said. But here we are. He left without looking back. Through the window, I watched him cross the courtyard. A local reporter from the Daily Beacon stood near the entrance, interviewing attendees for an upcoming veterans initiative. Her camera swung lazily, catching background shots of the plaques and anyone passing through. Tom walked right into the frame. The red record light blinked as he passed the veterans. Honor wall, his reflection momentarily superimposed against the bronze names behind him. The contrast was perfect, unplanned, merciless. The footage would air later that night beneath a segment titled, Integrity Audits Ongoing in Naval Procurement. I returned to my desk, the silence filling the space he left behind. The mug sat untouched steam, fading into nothing. I picked it up and set it back on the tray. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the small flag near the entrance. The building stood within sight of the same docks where I had once boarded transport to war. Some ghosts are circular. They don't haunt, they orbit. The phone rang again, this time from Harris. I answered. You see the news, ma'am, he said, chuckling. Your boy Branson made the evening broadcast. Walked right past the honor wall like a cautionary tale. I smiled faintly. Sometimes justice doesn't need a hammer, I said. Just a camera. Harris laughed louder. That's one for the books. You all right? Perfectly. Just doing inventory. After we hung up, I walked to the window again. The plaques caught the sunlight, each name a story finished but not forgotten. For every medal, there was paperwork for every hero. There was a clerk for every lie, eventually a correction. The system might lag, but it always syncs. I turned back to my desk and opened the next file in the stack, a new grant proposal for disabled veteran housing. It felt fitting, balancing one more scale in a ledger that finally made sense. The afternoon settled quiet again, the kind of quiet earned rather than inherited. The Pentagon's marble corridors echoed with footsteps and the quiet murmur of ceremony preparation. The notice had gone out that morning from Public Affairs Ref No and Purse 2024-113, formalizing the award presentation for Commander Elise Warren, retired. By noon, the flag-draped stage inside the Hall of Heroes gleamed under perfect white light. Rows of uniforms in crisp navy blue filled the audience medals, shining like small constellations. Reporters whispered to aides. Cameras rested on tripods, pointed toward the podium, where Admiral Marcus Reed waited, hands folded behind his back, the silver star resting in a velvet box. When my name was called, the sound rolled across the room in the even tone of an announcer used to precision. I stepped onto the stage. The weight of the uniform no longer felt like burden, but balance. Reed smiled faintly. Took us a while, he said quietly. Some truths take their time, I replied. He opened the box and lifted the medal by its ribbon. The citation he read followed the Department of Defense format exactly per directive, with 1348.33 M-line spacing Courier, 12 font. The familiarity of bureaucratic perfection made it feel somehow more sacred. for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action while serving as Convoy Operations Officer Task Force 7, Bravo Operation Iron Dove, Iraq, March 2003, Lieutenant Elise Warren distinguished herself by acts of heroism at great risk to her own life. The words filled the air like clean wind cutting through years of dust. When he finished, he pinned the star to my uniform, the metal cold against the fabric. I heard the faint click of cameras, and then silence, the collective pause of recognition that carries no sound but changes a room's gravity. The applause began as Reed stepped back and saluted. I returned the salute sharply, then allowed myself a breath. For a second, all the noise of old battles seemed to fold into that gesture. After the ceremony, the hallway outside buzzed with reporters' flashes, popping like small fireworks. A few of them called my name, but I kept walking toward the lobby where sunlight streamed through glass, high above the Pentagon seal. Melissa waited near the entrance with a bouquet of white lilies and an expression halfway between pride and disbelief. "You really did it," she said. "It was never about doing," I answered. "It was about finishing." She laughed quietly and handed me a small note, folded into a square. From Reed. Inside was one sentence written in neat black ink: "Quiet victories still count." Later that evening, news anchors repeated the story, showing the clip of the medal presentation on every network. For a few hours, the country seemed to remember the meaning of quiet service. But not everyone enjoyed the attention. Susan's name appeared in local headlines by week's end. Gala sponsors, cut ties after foundation. Audit, the article read. Her social charity events collapsed almost overnight once it became public that her organization had overstated donations. The same week, my foundation received endorsement from the Navy Women's Alliance, with new funding for veteran scholarships. Karma did not need my help. It simply observed the schedule. The following month, we hosted a press event at the Whitmore Veterans Center. Reporters gathered again, though this time the tone was lighter. The hall was filled with banners of blue and gold children waving small flags. I stepped to the podium ready to speak when a small thud behind me drew laughter. My cat had escaped Melissa's carrier and leapt onto the podium landing squarely beside the microphone. The cameras went wild. Someone shouted, "It's Iron Dove and her cat." The video spread within hours across social media with the tag Iron Dove and Cat. By evening, even the Navy's official page had reposted the clip with a caption, "Every hero deserves a wingman." I didn't mind. After decades of silence, humor felt like proof of peace. The foundation donations tripled that week. A journalist later told me the footage had replaced politics in the trending column for 3 consecutive days. The cat, meanwhile, remained unimpressed. It slept on my desk under the same silver star that now sat in a frame beside the original citation, printed in Courier 12, with perfect margins. Sometimes when the light hit the glass at just the right angle, it reflected both of us, soldier and stray survivor and witness. That reflection felt like closure. Justice hadn't been loud. It had been steady, patient, and precise. Morning in Williamsburg arrived like a quiet inspection, the light moving across the lake in clean lines while the neighborhood still slept. I woke at 600 and laced my shoes for a slow circuit along the water, the kind of physical training that keeps joints honest and thoughts orderly. The path smelled of wet pine and fresh soil from a night rain. A heron stood near the reeds, as if on sentry duty, patient and precise. By 0700, I was back in the kitchen with coffee steaming in the old tin mug that had survived 3 moves and 1 war. The radio on the counter clicked once, then released a calm voice that carried the comfort of ritual. "All stations clear, Channel 1 open." The words washed through the room like a checklist completed. Routine had become a shelter, not a cage. I straightened the notes on my desk and skimmed the day's agenda for the foundation grant approvals for housing retrofits, a call with a community college about veteran scholarships, a site visit at a small workshop where retired machinists trained younger vets to work a lathe without fear. The work felt like a series of quiet repairs to the same machine called dignity. At 9, Melissa arrived with a paper bag of blueberry muffins and an expression that mixed determination with a relief she had not known how to name a year ago. She had traded the impatient pace of social media internships for a position at the Veterans Support Circle, a weekly group for families who needed a place to speak without judgment. She set the bag on the table and pulled a chair close. "You coming tonight?" she asked. "The topic is reintegration and patience." I smiled. "That might be 2 topics." She laughed and tore a muffin in half. "I did the intake for a new spouse yesterday," she said. She kept apologizing for not being strong enough. I told her strength is good, but steadiness is better. "That sounds like someone raised by a convoy officer," I said. She rolled her eyes and leaned against my shoulder for a second, the contact brief and weightless, and then she was up again, collecting forms from her tote. Together we reviewed the circle's guidelines, short sentences that valued respect and discouraged confession as performance. These families needed truth, not applause. At noon, I walked the small garden behind the house, a square of order with basil and tomatoes, and 2 rows of lavender that drew bees like friends. Harris stopped by with a toolbox and a salute that was half joke and half habit. He fixed a loose hinge on the back gate and then stood with me watching the bees work. "Peace takes maintenance," he said. "I know," I replied. The afternoon brought administrative errands. A donor meeting on a porch shaded by live oaks, a call with a journalist who actually listened, an email from the Navy Women's Alliance confirming that the mentorship program had filled every slot more than half with first-generation college students who decided to wear a uniform of their own making. Between tasks, I let the house stand in silence so I could hear what quiet sounds like without fear. That is a luxury you only name after you earn it. Near 3, the news tickers began their crawl across the bottom of my muted television. The first line reported Tom Branson filing for bankruptcy protection. A panel of experts would surely debate the economy and procurement cycles, but the math was simple. You cannot build a career on paperwork that hides the truth. A second line followed about an IRS audit of Summit Group Holdings. The anchor managed to pronounce the words "ongoing review" with a tone that said more than the script allowed. I watched without feeling pleasure. Correction is not cruelty. It is balance. Melissa texted from the support center a half hour before the meeting. Someone asked if you would ever speak to the group she wrote. "Maybe not tonight. Maybe next month." I typed back. "Tell them I will attend when the story is about them, not me." She replied with a heart, then sent a second message that simply read, "Proud." Dusk softened the edges of the lake and drew the colors out of the trees until the world looked like a watercolor left to dry on a windowsill. I set a kettle on the stove and opened the cedar chest that held the flag presented to me years ago at a memorial for a friend whose humor had survived everything except a stranger's steering wheel. The folded triangle rested on blue velvet stars, aligned as if measured by a compass no eye could see. I lifted it carefully and set it on the table. Creases at exact 45 degrees. The act of folding a flag teaches hands to be gentle without losing strength. I unfolded and refolded in silence, each turn a slow breath, each tuck a small vow to remember without letting grief own the room. When I finished, the triangle sat clean and tight edges, true a shape the mind recognizes as both ending and shelter. I placed it back in the chest and closed the lid with the softness a librarian uses for a rare book. The cat jumped onto the bench and watched as if overseeing a ritual it finally understood. "Unauthorized personnel cleared," I said. It blinked once and stayed anyway. Later, I drove to the community center where the support circle gathered in a room with soft chairs and a vase of fresh flowers that Melissa insisted on bringing each week. People took turns speaking. A father talked about the way his son checked doors 3 times at night. A wife admitted she did not know how to turn down the volume of worry without feeling disloyal. A teenager asked if quiet counted as love. I told them quiet is where love protects its strength. Afterward, Melissa walked with me to the parking lot where the night had settled into that deep Virginia blue that makes you believe in the future without making any demands. She squeezed my hand. "Thank you for being patient with me," she said. "I used to think service meant you were gone. Now I think it means you found a way to be present for people you could not even see yet." I kissed her forehead. "You learned that faster than most admirals." We drove home with the windows open and the radio low. "All stations clear" repeated again, as if the world were confirming our shift had ended. Back in the house, I checked the locks, turned off the porch light, and stood for a minute in the hallway where the silver star hung beside the original citation. The frame reflected a thin strip of moonlight and a shadow that looked like a woman standing at ease. That felt right. Not on guard, not off duty. At ease. The day closed without fanfare, no speeches, no cameras, only order restored to a place that had earned it. In the quiet, I heard the simplest lesson the service ever taught me. When the work is done, stand down with grace. Veterans Day in Washington carried the kind of crisp air that feels rehearsed, the sky polished to a steady blue above the parade route. Flags lined Constitution Avenue, their fabric snapping like old commands, obeyed out of habit. I stood near the staging area with a small cluster of retired officers waiting for our turn. The announcer's voice came through the PA system measured, and certain each title drawn out like a note in a hymn. Commander Elise Warren, retired. The sound of it rippled through the crowd. Some clapped politely, others nodded, but a few faces lit with recognition, as if the name had finally found its place. I stepped forward, the march steady and unhurried. The uniform felt lighter now, more like memory than armor. Children waved from sidewalks, their small hands reflecting sunlight against the polished surface of metals. The air smelled faintly of diesel and roasted peanuts from vendors set up near the reflecting pool. Every sound carried weight, but none carried judgment. When the parade ended, the veterans assembled at the review stand for photographs. Admiral Reed found me near the edge, his gait slower now, but his presence still impossible to ignore. He handed me a folded envelope without ceremony. Paper, not email. I waited until the crowd drifted before opening it. The handwriting was unmistakable, compact, and deliberate. Every generation needs its iron dove. That was all. I folded the paper again and slipped it into my breast pocket beside the ribbon bar. Later that evening, back in Williamsburg, I placed the envelope on the dining table next to the silver star. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft clink of wind chimes outside. Melissa had gone home after the parade, promising to visit for dinner the next day. The cat circled the table once before curling under the chair as if it understood the mood. I took out the small plastic fork Susan had given me at that long-ago dinner, the cheap one meant for guests only. It had survived moves, floods of paperwork, and years of unspoken resentment. I cleaned it, polished the tines until they caught light, then set it beside the metal in a wooden shadow box lined with blue felt. The silver star gleamed cold and perfect, the fork absurd and true. Together they looked like the whole story condensed into two symbols of how respect and mockery can exist in the same life until time sorts them out. I closed the box and turned on the desk lamp. The beam hit the glass and scattered into soft edges across the wall, lighting the framed photographs of my unit in Iraq, the one with our convoy lined against a burnt orange horizon. 18 survivors. I traced the edge of the frame with my fingertip and whispered their call signs. Alpha 1 Bird Nest Bravo 9. The cadence had not changed in 21 years. Outside, the streetlights came alive one by one, reflecting in the window like constellations forming a language only the disciplined understand. I sat back the chair, creaking quietly beneath me. The letter lay open again, its single line now illuminated by the lamplight. Every generation needs its iron dove. I thought about what that meant. Not a legend or a hero, just someone who flies low enough to see the ground clearly, but steady enough to stay airborne when others fall silent. The medal was never the prize. The real victory was surviving the noise long enough to appreciate the quiet. I turned off the lamp and let the dim light from outside fill the room. In that half-glow, the glass of the shadow box reflected my face beside the metal and the fork. It looked like a truce between two lives, the one that fought and the one that learned how to rest. Some battles end with silence, and that is enough. Quiet justice isn't loud. It's earned in radio silence and revealed through truth and closure. Stand up for yourself, reclaim respect, and believe that justice without hate is the purest revenge through truth.